I never meant to stop walking, but when you hear your name spoken behind a closed door, by people who sign your paycheck, you freeze. Cut her salary by 40%. She's useless overhead. My name is Lisa Grant. I've spent 12 years at Carrington Dynamics, managing strategic operations, mentoring junior teams, and cleaning up messes behind the scenes. I don't chase attention. I don't need the spotlight, but I never thought they'd forget who I am entirely. I had stayed late that evening to finish a quarterly report for the executive team. My office was just down the hall from the conference room. The board was in session. I wasn't invited, but someone had left the door cracked open. I paused, just for a second, when I heard Colin's voice. The new CEO, young, polished, obsessed with streamlining. She's not a producer. She manages things, organizes, files paperwork. Anyone can do that. We're overpaying her by a mile. I felt something sharp twist beneath my ribs. His voice was cold, detached, like I was a spreadsheet, a line item. Another executive chuckled. You think she'll walk? Please, Colin replied. Lisa, she's a lifer. She's got a mortgage, no kids, and nowhere else to go. She needs this job. The room laughed. Laughed. That was the moment something cracked, not just in my heart, but in how I saw all of them. People I'd stayed late for, defended, fixed things behind the scenes when their plans fell apart. I was never the star, but I was the safety net, and now, I was useless overhead. I didn't cry. I didn't barge in. I turned around and walked back to my office. On the way, I caught my reflection in the glass. There was no shock on my face, just stillness, a quiet that even I didn't fully recognize. They think I'm stuck, I whispered under my breath. How quaint. The next morning, Colin scheduled an all-hands meeting for the strategy division. No agenda, no prep materials, just a sharp calendar invite that read, 9:00 in the morning, sharp, attendance required. That alone was unusual. He never addressed the whole department, unless it was a celebration or someone was being let go. I arrived 5 minutes early. Old habit. The room buzzed with low chatter as people filled in the seats. New hires took their places at the back, laptops open, eyes flicking nervously. Long-timers like me stayed up front. Until that day. At least, Colin entered at exactly 9:01, sleeves rolled up, no tie. That performative casual look he liked to wear when he was about to say something cruel, but call it leadership. He didn't sit, he didn't smile. Let's get right to it, he said. We're making structural changes in the department. Too many overlapping roles. Too much legacy redundancy. Legacy redundancy. I felt the shift before he said it. My chest tightened, but I kept my face still. He continued. We've done an internal assessment of contributions versus compensation, and frankly, there are inefficiencies, so, effective immediately, Lisa Grant's compensation package has been adjusted to reflect a more balanced structure. The room went silent. Someone shifted in their seat. A few eyes darted toward me. One of the younger analysts, Jared, looked at me with open pity. His face said what no one dared. Did he just do that? Here? Colin's tone never wavered. This isn't personal. It's just economics. Long-term management costs, when not aligned with productivity metrics, become drag. And frankly, management that's been here too long loses its edge. I didn't move. My hands rested gently on my lap. No response, no frown, just silence. But inside, something boiled. The humiliation of being stripped like that, publicly, without warning, was a heat that burned up my spine. I felt my pulse in my ears. Still, I gave him nothing. Jared blinked at me again, as if willing me to say something, do something. I didn't. Colin turned to the next slide. Talking about reallocating resources and focusing on younger, agile thinkers. His message was clear without ever saying it outright. The old guard was expendable. When the meeting ended, people filed out quickly. No one made eye contact. A few nodded at me awkwardly. Jared hesitated, then whispered, "I'm sorry." I nodded. "Don't be, it's just business." But in my chest, something had shifted. It wasn't just anger, it was strategy. They thought I was cornered. What they didn't know, what they could never know, was that I'd just marked the start of my own restructure. The next morning, I found a sealed envelope placed neatly at the center of my desk. My name printed in bold, no greeting, no message, just the revised contract, a 40% salary cut, effective immediately, same job title, same workload, same responsibilities, only less value, less respect. I knew Colin wouldn't deliver it in person. That would have required eye contact. At 8:50 in the morning, I sat down at my desk, flipped open the folder, and read every word slowly, though I already knew what it said. It was as if he needed me to see it printed, to make the insult official. There was a pen attached to the inside corner, with a gold clip, branded with the company's logo. Nice touch. At 9:02 in the morning, I signed it. Without flinching, without ceremony, I slid the document back into the envelope, sealed it again, and walked it straight to HR. The woman behind the desk looked confused. "Is there a mistake?" "No," I said, calm and even. "This is exactly what he wanted." I turned and walked out before she could respond. The rest of the day passed quietly. No one said a word. Jared avoided eye contact. People were polite, but cautious, like I was radioactive. By the time the sun began to fade through the blinds in my office, the building felt colder, emptier. At 7:28 in the evening, I sat alone with my laptop open, the cursor blinking on a blank email. But I didn't write. Instead, I pulled out my phone. 5 names, 5 numbers, 5 people I had worked with for years, who trusted me, not the company's brand, who'd seen me deliver results when Colin's vision still lived on a whiteboard. I didn't send a group text. I messaged each one separately. "Need to talk, privately, just us." No context, no pitch, no desperation. By 7:43 in the evening, all 5 had replied with the same answer. When and where? I stared at those messages for a long time, my fingers hovering above the screen. Colin thought I had no moves left, thought I would shrink beneath his shadow and accept my demotion like a good soldier. But he underestimated the quiet, the calm. Because silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes it means someone is drawing the first line of a very different plan, and I had just signed mine, with ink and with intent. I didn't rush it. After sending those 5 messages, I waited a full day before following up, not because I was uncertain, because I knew the power of patience. The next step wasn't about strategy, it was about trust. At 10:15 in the morning the next day, I met with the first client, Danielle Marks, at the old corner cafe on Ashford, where we used to hold brainstorming breakfasts before product launches. She was already there when I arrived, phone face down, espresso untouched. "Lisa," she said, her voice laced with concern. "What's going on?" I sat down and simply told her the truth. No bitterness, no embellishment. "They cut my salary by nearly half, called me dead weight. I'm still doing the same work, just now, discounted." Danielle's jaw tightened. "After all you've done for them?" I didn't nod. I didn't need to. "You built our expansion strategy from the ground up," she said. "And they think they can just replace you?" I looked her in the eye. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm just letting you know. There may come a time soon when I'm no longer with the company." Danielle didn't hesitate. "Tell me when you walk. I'll walk too." At 2:06 in the afternoon, I sat in a golf cart beside Marcus Tran, the CFO of a logistics firm I'd worked with for 8 years. The man didn't even let me finish. You were the reason our systems didn't implode last fall. If you go, I go. At 5:40 in the evening, I met Lillian and Roger, co-founders of a green tech startup, at their rooftop workspace downtown. They didn't blink when I told them. We were never loyal to Carrington, Roger said. We were loyal to you. Every conversation was different. Some began with small talk, others with silence. But they all ended the same way, with a firm, unspoken affirmation. They hadn't been working with the company. They had been working with me. By the end of the day, I sat in my car watching the city lights blur through the windshield. The weight of humiliation I'd carried since Colin's announcement didn't feel so heavy anymore. It wasn't just that they understood. It was that they never saw me the way he did. Disposable, replaceable, overhead. I wasn't a cost on a spreadsheet. I was the reason they stayed. And now, I was the reason they'd be willing to leave. By the time I returned home that evening, my mind was no longer circling Colin's insults or the sound of department heads chuckling at my expense. I had moved past that noise. What echoed now was something deeper, older, a memory I hadn't touched in years, but one that lived in the foundation of everything they thought they owned. Because Carrington Dynamics wasn't always the rising star it claimed to be. 5 years ago, it was circling the drain. Burn rates had exceeded forecasts. A major investor had pulled out after a PR scandal, and payroll barely made it through the final quarter. The board was desperate, and desperate people make deals they don't read too carefully. Back then, I wasn't just a strategy officer, I was a quiet fixer, and I had one connection no one else at the table did. My godfather, Raymond Ellis. Raymond wasn't a venture capitalist. He didn't need the attention or the upside. What he offered Carrington was simple. $4 million in bridge capital, paid in full over 2 installments, to be used strictly for operating expenses. But he had one non-negotiable condition. Future credit facilities, lines of funding, or restructuring loans cannot be approved without signature authorization from my appointee, Lisa Grant. They agreed. They were too panicked not to. I still remember the look on the CFO's face when he signed the final page. Exhausted, grateful, clueless. None of them imagined the clause would matter long term. They thought it was symbolic, just a favor to a benevolent backer. They never thought I'd use it. But I kept the contract, not a scanned copy, the original, ink-signed, notarized version, sealed and stored in a fireproof box in the back of my home office. And I remembered exactly where I placed it. Bottom drawer, behind the retirement folders, beneath a blank leather-bound notebook no one had ever opened. At 8:02 in the evening, I unlocked the box and pulled the document out for the first time in years. The paper was thick, heavy. My name written clearly on the line marked Appointee Authority, Section 4.2. My signature, my initials on every page. I ran my thumb over the embossed notary stamp, then slid the contract into a black folder with a magnetic clasp. I didn't need to show it yet, not until the timing was perfect, because Colin thought I was boxed in, that my only weapons were whispers and client relationships. He couldn't see the iron key I'd had in my pocket all along, the one that could lock him out of every financial move he'd planned. The irony was almost poetic. The very contract that saved his job 5 years ago would be the one to bring it to an end. They thought I was overhead. They never knew I was the gate, and I was just about ready to close it. There's a particular tension that lingers in a room full of people pretending they've won something. It smells like fresh champagne and desperation, masked by too many smiles that don't reach the eyes. At 9:20 in the morning, I received a calendar update titled Executive Champagne Briefing, 10:05 in the morning. Conference Room Alpha. Attendance mandatory. Subject line, Expansion approved. Of course it was Colin, celebrating his latest maneuver. He'd likely rushed through a funding request with the bank. Confident he had dotted all the I's. He must have assumed the old deal. The deal was just another forgotten clause buried under 5 years of success. At 10:03, I walked into conference room Alpha, now dressed like a showroom for excess. Gold-rimmed flutes, catered pastries with tiny edible logos. The interns stood awkwardly against the wall, unsure whether they were allowed to celebrate or just serve. Colin stood center stage, sleeves casually rolled, hair styled within an inch of perfection. "Good morning, everyone," he beamed. "Today marks a turning point in Carrington's future." He lifted his glass. "We've secured a $4 million expansion credit. This funding will help us scale faster, build smarter, and most importantly, hire new energy into our leadership." I didn't flinch, just smiled. Colin continued, turning subtly toward the older section of the room. "We can't rely on legacy thinking to push us forward. Sometimes, we have to let go of old frameworks, of overhead that stopped moving the needle." It wasn't subtle, but subtlety was never his strong suit. He raised his glass again. Everyone else followed. I did, too. The champagne was cold, dry, and far too celebratory for a victory that hadn't yet cleared. At 10:21 in the morning, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it beneath the table. Email from Hanover Trust Bank. Subject: Funding Hold Notification. Your recent credit line request is currently pending. Signature from L. Grant still required to proceed. I locked the screen. No reaction. Let the bubbles do their job. Let them celebrate. Let the illusion run just a bit longer. The next 20 minutes dragged like plastic smiles. People toasted, laughed too loudly, posed for photos. The head of marketing even cried, thanking Colin for believing in bold moves. But something beneath the noise shifted, a subtle unease. The IT manager glanced at his watch twice. The HR director kept checking her phone. The interns stood stiff, as if sensing they weren't supposed to be there at all. Even Colin's smile dimmed slightly when the CFO asked, "We're fully cleared, right?" Colin waved it off. "Just paperwork formalities." But formalities have teeth. At 10:49 in the morning, I stood, adjusted my blazer, and quietly slipped out. No one noticed, or if they did, they pretended not to. Outside, the hallway felt cooler, lighter. I walked slowly, heels echoing on the tile. My reflection in the glass walls didn't look victorious, but it didn't look defeated either, because while Colin toasted to expansion, the deal he thought he'd closed was already locked, and the key? Still in my hand. I didn't go back to my desk right away. I stopped at the small kitchen area on the 10th floor first, where someone had just brewed a new pot of coffee. I poured myself half a cup, just enough to warm my hands, and stood by the window for 2 full minutes. Across the glass, I caught a reflection behind me. Mira, the new accounts assistant, hovering by the fridge. "You okay?" she asked gently. I smiled. "I'm good." She studied me for a second longer, as if unsure whether to believe it, then quietly nodded and left. I appreciated her kindness, but I didn't need concern. I needed space. At 11:02 in the morning, I slipped back into my office and closed the door behind me. The second it clicked shut, the air shifted, the smile dropped, my body moved on instinct, laptop open, inbox ready. The Hanover Trust message was still there, patient, emotionless, waiting. Subject: Funding, hold notification. Your recent credit line request is currently pending. Signature from L. Grant still required to proceed. Under it, the link to authorize, a single click. But I didn't click it. I hit reply, typed without hesitation, and pressed send. Declined. Do not attempt renewal without full authorization. No greeting, no closing. Just the kind of cold edge that says, "You don't get to ignore me anymore." At 11:10 in the morning, the email left my screen. And with it, Carrington's lifeline stalled, quietly, invisibly. a jammed artery no one could feel. Yet. Next came the second move. From the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, I retrieved a compact matte black USB drive. It wasn't labeled, not connected to the network, nothing fancy, just quiet, functional security. Over the next 30 minutes, I carefully copied all Tier A client documentation, project timelines, relationship notes, issue logs, personalized rollout maps. These weren't company secrets. They were mine. I had built every plan, solved every crisis, retained every deal through midnight calls, and trust that took years to earn. At 11:46 in the morning, I transferred the final folder, Client Transition Contingency, Private Notes. That one contained my personal assessments, notes I never shared. And wouldn't. I slipped the USB into its case and secured it in the side pocket of my leather bag. A small detail, a quiet conclusion. Then I sat back, letting my chair lean until it gently touched the wall behind me. No part of me was shaking, because this wasn't revenge. It wasn't an emotional outburst or a desperate grab for power. It was clarity. Outside my door, I heard Colin's voice echoing faintly through the glass, something about productivity metrics and scalable assets, business jargon, performance theater. He had no idea the money hadn't cleared. I imagined him pacing in front of his screen, wondering why no confirmation had arrived, probably blaming an analyst, probably raising his voice just enough to make someone nervous. But not me. He wouldn't suspect me because I was processed. He thought my story had ended with a demotion and a polite nod. That was the beauty of invisibility. It makes people blind. They forget the one who signs quietly can also shut it all down. Just as quietly. And I had. The meeting invite came through late the night before. Executive Finance Review, 10:30 in the morning. Boardroom B, required attendance. I didn't need to ask what it was about. Colin had finally realized the numbers weren't moving. The funding hadn't landed. The system wasn't stalled. It was blocked. And now, he was ready to confront the problem he couldn't see coming. I arrived at 10:25 in the morning, 5 minutes early, as always. The boardroom was filled with quiet tension. Colin stood near the touchscreen monitor, already mid-conversation with Javier. The CFO, a few department heads sat along the far side, marketing, product, legal. Their faces were tight, controlled, curious. I slid into my usual seat at the end of the table. Black leather folder resting calmly on my lap. Colin didn't acknowledge me at first. He clicked through a few slides. Charts, forecasts, stale positivity. Then, without warning, his tone shifted. "We've hit a small administrative snag with the credit disbursement," he said. "Apparently, there's an authorization issue, but it's nothing we can't resolve quickly." He finally turned toward me. "Lisa, I believe there's a signature missing on the funding agreement. We need you to sign off so we can proceed with deployment." I looked at him. Straight. Silent. I let the pause hang in the air for just long enough to feel unnatural. Then I placed the black folder on the table and slowly opened it. Inside was the original contract. 5 years old. Embossed. Ink signed. Notarized. I slid it forward so everyone could see the highlighted clause. Section 4.2. All future credit facility approvals require written signature authorization from the appointee of the originating capital provider, Lisa Grant. Gasps weren't audible, but the stillness in the room was louder than any outburst could have been. Colin stared at the page, blinking like the words were in another language. He tried to laugh. "That was years ago. Surely that clause has expired." Javier, the CFO, leaned forward and studied the document closely. He didn't speak for 10 seconds. Then, "She's right. This clause is still active. It was never nullified or renegotiated." Colin's jaw clenched. "No one informed me of this." Javier glanced sideways. "It was your job to read the agreement. The silence that followed was suffocating. The legal director's eyes darted between me and Colin. The product lead started fidgeting with his pen. And me? I exhaled, quietly, fully. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath since I walked into this building on day 1 of his tenure. "I'm not here to negotiate," I said. "I've already declined. The funds won't move forward, and no one in this room can override that." Colin tried to recover, straightening his back. "That would be considered sabotage." "Lisa!" I tilted my head slightly. "Only if you misunderstood who had control." He didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. I gathered my folder, stood slowly, and turned toward the door. No one moved. No one stopped me. As I stepped out of the boardroom at 10:47 in the morning, I felt something shed from my shoulders, not just the weight of his voice, or his power, but the grip of years of being looked through. This wasn't just confrontation, it was release. There was no dramatic slam of the boardroom door, no final glare, no whispered gasps behind me. Just the rhythmic echo of my heels on the polished tile as I walked the long hallway toward my office for the last time, at 1:15 in the afternoon. I entered my space, the one they never bothered to redesign. Same beige walls, same slow printer, same photo of the strategy team from 5 years ago, half of whom had already been quietly pushed out. I stood by the window and watched the clouds shift in slow motion above the skyline. The board meeting was over. The game was done. Colin hadn't followed. No one had. There was nothing left to challenge. The control had never been his. It had only taken this long for him, and the rest of them, to finally see it. At 2:08 in the afternoon, I composed my resignation letter. It was only 3 sentences long. Effective immediately. I resign from my role at Carrington Dynamics. My responsibilities are complete. The rest is yours to figure out. I didn't add a thank you. I didn't owe them one. But I didn't hit send yet. Not yet. Instead, I spent the next hour tying up the last of my personal files, removing bookmarks, clearing cached logins, and exporting a few non-sensitive templates I'd created on my own time. When I closed the final document, a gentle knock came at the door. Mira peeked in. "I heard... What happened? Is it true?" she asked cautiously. I nodded. "Yes, it's over." She stepped inside and lowered her voice. "I know I'm new, but watching how you handled all this, I've never seen anything like it. They didn't even realize you were the one holding the thread." I smiled softly. Sometimes the thread doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to hold everything together until it's time to let go. At 3:12 in the afternoon, I hit send on the resignation email. No reply came, not right away. I didn't need one. I gathered my bag, walked to the elevator, and didn't look back. The next morning, at 8:05, I brewed my own coffee, at home. The sunlight poured in through the kitchen windows like I hadn't noticed in months. No rush, no inbox, no forced small talk over lukewarm muffins. But my phone buzzed. First, a notification from Danielle Marks. "As of this morning, we've terminated our engagement with Carrington Dynamics. We're moving our contract." Then Marcus, "Just submitted our formal notice. Expect our team to follow you." By 8:50, I had 5 separate emails from 5 separate clients, all confirming they'd ended their agreements with Carrington. Each message carried the same tone. Not vengeful, not dramatic, just clear. But the last one, Roger, from the green tech firm, he said it outright. "Lisa was the brand, not your company." 6 words. That's all it took to make every humiliation, every overlooked meeting, every silent battle worth it. I wasn't a cog in their machine. I was the engine they never bothered to acknowledge. And now, I was driving in a direction they couldn't follow. The rain started just as I stepped outside Carrington Dynamics for the last time. Not heavy, just enough to blur the edges of the streetlights and soften the glass towers above me. I didn't run for cover. I let it fall. Cold, clean, freeing. Behind me, the building stood still, silent, the place where I had been ignored, underestimated, erased. But now, I was the one walking away at 4:02 in the afternoon, standing on the curb with my umbrella still folded at my side. I unlocked my phone. One new notification. Funding approved. Welcome to Grant & Co. For a moment, I just looked at it. Those 5 words weren't just confirmation, they were transformation. I smiled, closed the message, and flagged down the first cab I saw. 20 minutes later, I walked into a different kind of office. No marble floors, no polished slogans on the walls, just warm wood panels, soft lighting, and one large monitor already waiting. My name, Grant & Co., was etched on the glass above the door. Inside, the lights glowed amber against the early twilight. My team, small but fierce, was finishing setup. I set my bag down gently, took a breath, and sat at my new desk. The Zoom waiting room chimed. 5 names, 5 clients, 5 people who didn't just follow me. They believed in me. I clicked Admit All. Their faces filled the screen, smiling, unshaken, present. We're ready when you are, Lisa. As I began the call, the door to the office opened behind me. I turned, expecting the courier who was supposed to drop off branding samples, but it wasn't him. It was Mira. She looked different without the badge, more grounded, still cautious, but lighter. She hesitated by the door. I saw the company update. I figured I'd check if maybe you were hiring. My chest tightened, not from surprise, but from something gentler, a full circle beat. I stood up, nodded toward the extra desk near the window. Let's talk after the call. She smiled, and for the first time, so did I. He thought I was a forgotten wire. I was the main circuit, and I flipped the switch.